Welcome to the Books on Air podcast. I'm Suzanne Harris, and my listeners get the story behind every book. Joining me today is Ann Curran, and she's here to talk about her book, Spaghetti with Raisins, Guiding Your Loved One with Dementia Toward the Safety of Long-Term Care. Ann, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you on Books on Air.
Oh, thank you, Suzanne. It's so nice to be here.
You know, people write books for all kinds of reasons. And a book like this, I think, is so important, and there is so much needed out there about this kind of topic because people are dealing with it. Why did you decide to write this book?
I wrote this book, Susan, to try to bring more awareness to the reader of how very difficult it is to be a caregiver, and offer them possibly ways to help as they go through this journey with their loved one.
Well, you've got both sides of this because you were a social worker, so you have dealt with many families and many clients who were dealing with this issue, but then it became very personal for you because your husband developed dementia.
Oh, that's right. It was very complicated. He and I met back in the late 80s after I lost a son in an auto accident, and I was working at a hospital in New Hampshire, and his niece was working there as well, and he had lost a wife in an auto accident, so she introduced us and brought us together, hoping that we would find some happiness in our futures. And
did you?
We did. We were married 23 years, and we had some wonderful, wonderful times. The last 5 years were very difficult because of his dementia increasing to the degree it did. But yes, we found lots of happiness.
Tell me about the title. What does the title Spaghetti with Raisins mean?
Well, you have to get to page 57, I believe it is, to find out. Gene in his dementia was also a very creative person. And I was working one day. We were in New York. I was living in New York with him at the time, and he made supper for me. Had the table all set with a nice tablecloth and 2 candles lit and some music, and he served me spaghetti with raisins. And I just thought it was very creative that he put the raisins in there and asked him about it. He credited it to his creativity. So that's where I got the title of Spaghetti with Raisins.
Well, of course, I'm curious. How did it taste? How did it taste, Ann?
It tasted like spaghetti with marinara sauce and raisins. It was very good.
Really? I think you've made me, as well as our listeners, go, raisins? I'm going to have to try that the next time I have spaghetti.
Well, actually, I looked it up on the internet, and there is such a thing as spaghetti with raisins, so it was a bit nonplussed when I found that out.
Oh, how funny. I love it. Well, as I looked at the book, I noticed the titles of the chapters, and there are quite a few chapters, and they have titles like Love and Loss, Long Ago, Courting Time. Give me an overview of what the book really is about. What will our listeners, when they become readers, really learn from your book?
Well, I wrote the book, as you asked, for a couple of reasons. First of all, I need a clarification myself. I came out of the experience somewhat confused about what had happened over those years. And I found Gene, after we met, very, very charming and committed to the relationship. And he got along very well with my family. It was a second marriage for both of us. And I moved to New York up from New Hampshire. And we lived there for a 3-year period before we moved back to Massachusetts with my children. And it really wasn't until we were purchasing a new home in Massachusetts that I found that his thinking was askew in the sense that he could not seem to do anything sequentially. He would question anything that was being done over and over again. And I had noticed, previous to that, he'd lose his keys or he'd forget this or that, but I just thought they were just daily occurrences and would laugh about it. But until we got into a serious business situation and saw that he was having difficulty with that, it was then that I really began to pay attention. So it was just a matter of watching and waiting from that point on. We just continued our lives, and I started to question as it went on. And one day, after many years, probably 7 or 8 years, I was pretty befuddled and sad, and I went into a nursing home to speak to a social worker and broke down. And she said, it sounded like my husband was ready for some more care than what I could give him, and that I definitely needed some attention. And so we kind of took it from there.
It's difficult. I shared with you before we started recording, my experience was not with dementia, but the experience that I had was with my mother, and it was Alzheimer's. And I think for me, this is a parent. This is someone who had been with me all my life and had been, a rock for me all my life as an only child. And watching her just go away was one of the most difficult things that's ever happened to me. And I remember, at first, you don't want to see those little things that begin to happen. We would come over there. I went there every Sunday to see her. And we would go over there and walk in the house, and she would be just sitting there in the dark. And I thought, that's a little odd. But, you sort of ignore it and you sort of go on. And I suspect that many of our listeners have done similar things, whether it's a spouse or a parent or whoever it is that you're watching change almost right before your very eyes. It's not a change that you want to see. Did you experience the same kind of thing, even though you were a professional and you had dealt with this before?
Oh, absolutely. As things began to become clearer to me, and I realized I was denying, as you say, it's kind of a safeguard from the pain of it. It seemed like I was in the same state as he was, because I got up every day. It was just he and I, and there were no family around. And I began to play the games that he was playing, to appease him, not to upset him. If I had responded the way I usually would to something that isn't being done logically, it would have created a lot of arguments, which over the years and previous years ahead. So I learned not to do that, but to learn to try to be more like him, as to reduce conflict.
You're absolutely right. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that was the best way for me to keep peace in the situation, because he tended to get very involved with my children's lives and created a lot of problems with my family. I had 5 children that were married, and he created a lot of chaos with them by making small things large. When I would have just brushed it off or something, he would exacerbate it. And that became the most difficult part of our marriage, was his interference with my family. And of course, my family was protective of me, wanted to visit, but actually ended up shutting them away in the end, so that I really was pretty much alone with him. So that was just one facet of the situation that you don't ever think about.
And that's one of the real facets that you hit in the book, is talking about that caregiver aspect of being the caregiver for that person, and how long can you keep that person at home with you? How long can you experience that emotional up and down and the drain that occurs because you're on alert all the time?
Exactly.
Because you never know what's going to happen, right?
And, luckily I had been a social worker, so I knew pretty much how to work the resources, or how to try to find them and get them. But I was not familiar with the whole idea of dementia, why it happened. And so I knew it was time to talk to his primary care doctor, and we did get him tested cognitively. And the psychologist at the time said that, yes, he was ready for nursing home care. But it was 4.5 years later that I began the process of trying to get him into a nursing home. And I did. It was very difficult, probably the worst thing I ever had to do in my life, and I've had some tough times. But he resisted very vigorously, and it gave me a very hard time while he was at the nursing home. And he behaved so well in the nursing home. He was very charming and very vocal and articulate, and his kind of dementia did not affect his speech or his talk right away. It was frontal lobe dementia, and it happened because of the accident with his wife. When he lost his wife, he was driving, and his wife, that was a fatal accident for his wife of 42 years. And he had a hematoma afterwards, and we assumed later on that that's really what caused the dementia for him. But in any case, I did not place him for 4.5 years, and even at that time, he was still articulate and wanted out. And I think we were at our worst low in our marriage at that time. I had lost 15, 20 pounds for no reason at all, and he was looking red-eyed and teary-eyed and calling his relatives and trying to get their attention and any politician's attention he could to try to convince him that he did not belong there, that this is something that I did. And it was just a very, very bad time for us.
It sounds
to the point where I considered bringing him home again, because the nursing home was not helping either. The psychologist had come to me one day and asked me, why couldn't I find it in my heart to bring him home? There's nothing wrong with him. And I asked him, I said, didn't you read his diagnosis, that he had a fire in the house, that there was a flood in the house, that he's fallen down? And yet, the nursing home insisted that he didn't belong there, and it just broke my heart. I did bring him home, and it helped. It put a little bit of warmth back into our relationship, and he regained his trust in me somewhat. But I constantly told him during that period of 9 months that he was home that I was going to have to bring him back at some point. And I don't think he ever really acknowledged it, but I think he did sometimes understand. And it was then that I seriously started looking for a nursing home that would be suitable for him, to his specific needs. And I finally did find a good nursing home for him.
What a difficult time you went through, Anne.
It was very difficult.
Now, I believe that you have some tips that you want to share with our listeners that are included in the book. Would you do that now?
Certainly. I put these tips on the back cover, hoping that if my book got on a shelf, then when they picked it up, the reader picked it up, they could look at the back of it and read what I say. And what I said was, your help is needed. And then I give a few tips, starting by stop by for tea, a chat, if that's all you can do for the caregiver. Stop by and let the caregiver go shopping by herself for an hour